would like to welcome our first candidate, Mr. Richard Cordray.
Go ahead.
Mr. Richard Cordray is a lifelong Ohioan born and raised in Grove City. His parents dedicated their careers to working on behalf of people with disabilities and taught Richard that there's no higher calling than dedicating yourself to the service of others, a lesson Mr. Cordray has never forgotten. Mr. Cordray believes people deserve to be treated fairly and with dignity, respect, and that too often they are left behind while the system serves the special interest. That is why he is running for governor, to change the system so that it works for Ohioans and their families. Over the last 5 years, Cordray served as the first ever director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a position that he was appointed to by President Barack Obama, where he led the agency that was launched in the aftermath of the nation's financial crisis, dedicated to defending families against Wall Street and corporate abuse. Before serving as the Consumer Bureau, Cordray defended Ohioans as Attorney General. The Better Business Bureau recognized Mr. Cordray with an award for his work on behalf of the Ohio business and the consumers for greater fairness in the marketplace. Prior to serving as Attorney General, Mr. Cordray served as the Ohio Treasurer and Ohio State Representative and as Ohio's first ever Solicitor General, where he represented the state of Ohio before the U.S. Supreme Court and the Ohio Supreme Court. Mr. Cordray still lives in Grove City, Ohio, with his wife Peggy and their 2 children. Thank you for coming today, Mr. Cordray.
Thank you.
And I will ask the first question. Why do you vote for Ohio Kids?
I vote for Ohio Kids because my wife and I have twins, a boy and a girl, and as we have seen them and worked with them as they've been growing up, it makes you think immediately as you look at them in school about all the other children and wanting people to have the same opportunity you want for your own children. That's what we need to do in Ohio, and there's much that government can do to support families who are struggling, single-parent families, families with 2 working parents, trying to juggle a lot of responsibilities but still do the best by their children. And so I will stand up and fight for Ohio's kids and make sure they're a priority in terms of funding, in terms of attention, in terms of making progress, and also I'll fight for their parents and grandparents who are sometimes raising grandchildren now to make sure they have what they need to do their best for their children, which is what we all want.
Thank you. And the first question will be Pat.
Ohio has one of the worst infant mortality rates in the country, ranking 41st in the nation. We also see severe racial disparities in our state, with black babies dying at almost 3 times the rate of white babies. If elected governor, how will you work to ensure that pregnant mothers have access to prenatal care, to improve birth outcomes, and what other supports do you envision as part of your plan to ensure that more children live to their first birthday?
Thank you, Pat, for that question. This is something that we have seen, I've seen all over Ohio. We've had roundtables on this issue in several different parts of Ohio, and we're seeing incipient efforts and growing efforts, particularly by our cities, to address this problem. Ohio is one of the worst states in the nation for infant mortality. How could that be in the year 2018? How could we let that be? We need to broaden the bandwidth in the legislature and address a broader range of issues. We need to understand the social determinants of health and how that's affecting infant mortality. The fact that we are 49th in the country for infant mortality in African American families and communities is inexcusable in this state. Now, we also need to make sure we have the right interventions. We need to start with parents before they are parents. We have to start with pregnant mothers. We have to have home visits. We have to have good prenatal care. We have to have things that our legislature has not paid as much attention to as they should, and we all need to pull together and pull people together to address these issues. We need to help mothers give birth to healthy babies. We need to help them carry babies to full term. We need them to have the support they need, and then we need to support children on through early childhood and into the K through 12 system. But a lot of it starts before birth, and it starts with aggressive interventions and understanding the nature of these problems, and as I said, addressing broader issues about the social determinants of health. the effect of income inequality, the effect of stagnant wages, the effect of rising healthcare costs and lack of coverage. These are all things that contribute enormously to the problems we've seen in Ohio.
The next question will be given by Debbie.
The research is clear that healthy children do better in school and grow up to become healthy, productive adults. In Ohio, Medicaid covers more children than any other healthcare provider, nearly half of Ohio's kids. If elected governor, how will you work to ensure that children are a priority in Medicaid, including having access to the comprehensive, stable healthcare coverage they need to thrive?
That's a great question, and it's a great observation you made about the data. We have some terrific nonprofits in the state of Ohio who have brought us now convincing research and data on this issue. And I was saying backstage that you can care about children or you can care about data. And either way you get to the right answer, which is that we need to be more aggressive at intervening in early childhood. If you don't care about either children or data, I don't know what business you have being in public life at all. But here they point in the same direction. And what we know is that children need to get off to a faster start, and parents and families need more support to help them do that. Starting at K in the K through 12 is too late. Too many kids are left behind by then. 40% are coming to kindergarten not ready to learn. About 40% are coming out of 12th grade not ready for the workforce. There's a direct line correlation between the two. Now, as to Medicaid in particular, it is covering a tremendous number of people in the state of Ohio. And the Medicaid expansion, and I will give him credit, Governor Kasich showed a lot of courage bringing the Medicaid expansion to Ohio. And although it typically covers adults, it affects children and it affects families in significant ways. And the rest of the Medicaid program, of course, as you know, was originated to really cover a lot of children. And the CHIP program has been important in Ohio too, and there's ways I believe we could expand that. But we have to have good health coverage. We can't be looking to either end any of these programs or shrink them down. Budget Director Keene told us recently and gave convincing data once again that that is a good deal for Ohio, and I will fight to keep it. I've said that throughout this campaign, and I will work with the legislature, but not allow them to roll that back. And we will, in the Medicaid program, make the necessary reforms for more proactive, more preventive care, more emphasis on immunizations and vaccinations for children, more emphasis on prenatal care for mothers, so that expectant mothers, so that we can get the results we want and our children can get off to a good start. And ultimately, the dividends that pays for the future of Ohio are immense and really incalculable.
David?
Okay, we talked about data. So here's another data point. I think you touched on it a little bit. In Ohio, only 40% of kids are entering kindergarten ready to learn. And we know that those kids who start behind typically stay behind, demonstrating lower academic performance throughout school and decreased rates of post-secondary attainment and workforce readiness. So if elected governor, what are your plans to ensure that every child gets the early experiences they need to ensure they're set up for success?
Okay, and I think there's two different pieces to that answer. One is, what are you doing for children 0 through 5 pre-K, and what are you doing for children K through 12? And I would say the good news about 0 through 5 in this campaign has been that the two candidates, Mike DeWine and myself, have pretty much agreed on this issue. We both believe that early childhood intervention and quality learning programs are necessary, they're essential, and we are willing to invest more resources in that. And I've been around the state and seen some efforts that are being made at the local level to improve pre-K, universal pre-K. It's not easy to knit all of that together, but the state can play an important strategic role and leadership role and help provide resources, not just to have pre-K programs, but to have the kind of quality programs that we know are really essential for children to rise and get off to the kind of start we need them to get as they go into K through 12. But home visits and child care support for families, for working parents, and practically all parents, and great number of parents now are working parents, either single parent or two parents, and grandparents, if the opioid crisis means that grandparents are raising their grandchildren. It happens all over this state. Foster care system needs attention and needs improvement, and that is being strained right now by the opioid crisis. And then ultimately the kind of quality pre-K programs that Dayton and Cincinnati and Cuyahoga County are working on, but we need to scale up around the state. And then I would add to that K through 12. It's not a given that if you start behind in kindergarten that you necessarily have to end up coming out behind in 12th grade. Our K through 12 system, there's a lot of great teachers who do a lot of great work that helps inspire and bring children along. But we also need, I think this is crucial, wraparound services in our schools. There's so many families for whom the logistical difficulties and the time and the understanding to get mental health services and dental service and social services of all kinds, it really defeats them. And if we can do that at the school building, if we can provide wraparound services in the schools, as is happening in some places around this state, I think that will be a crucial determinant that can help bring a lot of children forward even in their K through 12 years, and it's not a given that if they start behind, they stay behind. And we should never accept that that's a given in the state of Ohio.
Alex, you're the next one.
So if I told my neighbor that my daughter had cancer, our daughters go to college together, I would almost certainly get a hug. If I told that same neighbor that my daughter was depressed or, God forbid, suicidal, there would almost inevitably be an awkward silence. But yet, here in this great state of Ohio, 1 in 7 kids have experienced traumatic issues, before they reach first grade. We know that 50% of all adults with mental illness were diagnosed with that mental illness before they were 14. And we know the leading cause of death, second leading cause of death among teenagers is the suicide. So if you become governor, can you talk about what we need to be doing to raise and treat the issues of mental illness, to raise and treat the issues of toxic environments among our youngest and most precious Ohioans?
Yeah. Thank you, Alex, for that. And you and I have talked about this issue of how people regard physical health issues different from mental health issues. And there's been a lot of effort over the years to try to close that gap, a lot of effort around mental health parity. And it's been legislated in some respects. But if it's not actually executed on the ground, that it isn't really affecting people's lives in the way that it should. Mental health services are critical for young people. As you said, suicides, there's no question that mental health interventions can help lower the number of suicides that children engage in Ohio, and adults for that matter as well. We need to actually execute mental health parity. This is not so much an issue for the legislature now, it's an issue of funding, it's an issue of effort by the executive branch of the state government that I will have control over as the governor. We, of course, have a system in Ohio where we have state mental health work that's done, and we have local county mental health work that's done. And the state has not supported the counties as well as they might. The reimbursement system for these services right now is broken, and it is not working. And we're having a lot of small providers under a lot of economic pressure right now, and they may go out of business. I'm hearing that throughout this year, which has happened with the conversion of the payment system. But that we recognize the principle, and I think we do, that mental health matters as much as physical health, and maybe the determining factor for a lot of young people is important, but actually putting our effort and our money where our mouth is on that and actually making it work. And wraparound services will be a key way in which this can be helpful. It's mental health services that often fall through the cracks for families. It's hard enough sometimes for them to step up and agree and decide that they need mental health services for their children. But in the schools, people can be diagnosed. We can have mental health professionals there at the schools. We can make sure that they are handy and that we can see what's happening with children in the classroom and we can get what they need. That is really important, and there are ways we can do a much better job of delivering that, and we will work to do it.
And Michael.
As you know, we are here today to talk about a group of young people who cannot vote and who are too often forgotten about when there's tough decisions that need to be made around budget priorities and policy initiatives. We are excited that you are here today talking about your plans for our kids in the state. But our ultimate goal is to see these plans translated into real investments and a real sound policy. If elected governor, and this question is actually coming from a tweet that I got from school board member Ozzie Davis. He said, how will you make sure that the youngest, the most vulnerable residents in our state, particularly African-American kids and rural kids in our state, is a priority for your administration?
Thank you for that. What you're doing today is an important element in this. You're creating, you have a broad coalition, you're creating pressure on the public officials. You have both myself and my opponent here. One of us will be the next governor of this state. Legislators are hearing you. They are seeing your research. It is undeniable how important this is. And to me, the fact that this has not become a partisan issue in this campaign is really reassuring, and it gives me confidence that we can move forward. What it also tells me is that when I'm the next governor of the state, there is a very sound basis on which we can work in a bipartisan way with the General Assembly to get done the things we need to get done. And I will say that there will be 3 different looming stages of this up ahead for me. On November 7th, as the governor-elect, we will have 2 months to put together an administration. And appointments to key positions that will affect these policies are going to be important, and I invite you all to have input and input as a group into who are the kinds of leaders around Ohio who are committed to this and will help us get this done. And I'm not just talking cabinet officials, I'm talking about, as you know, many different appointments that will matter. It also matters that the administration be one where these different departments and pieces of it are not siloed from one another. Education versus mental health versus health services. You know, we need to have an administration that understands that this has to be put together. It isn't about your budget or your priorities or what you can accomplish in your annual report. It's about what we do together for the state of Ohio. Then the governor will have to present a budget to the General Assembly over the next couple of months. That will be a statement of priorities for the next 4 years. And then there will be, as you know, something of a wrestling match with the legislature over whether those priorities will be honored and upheld. And if we start with those priorities, and they will be in my budget, we will then work to make sure that they're followed through the General Assembly. And all during that time, my administration will be starting to work, not just with the legislature, but with cities, with counties, with school districts across the state, with local services who often have been mistreated, I would say, for the last 8 years. Money has been taken from local government and community services to Columbus and has not come back to the communities. And many communities, especially strapped communities, are starved for these resources. And it makes it even harder to cope with these hard problems and hard problems on top of those like the opioid epidemic in Ohio. So there is much to do. I'm ready to get to work. I realize I probably won't get a break until about this time next year, and I'm good with that. If none of you will take a break either and you'll work hard with me, we will make a lot of progress. And I appreciate the fact that you are stepping up, making your voices heard, showing us the data, and that will be, I believe, convincing to the leaders in the state of Ohio. It's certainly convincing to me.
And Mr. Cordray, too often kids' health and academic outcomes are determined by race, geographic location, or family income. If elected governor, how will you work to ensure that all kids have the equal opportunity to grow, live, and thrive and succeed in Ohio?
So I've talked a lot about this in the campaign. You know, people will say, and there's truth in it, that the economy is very good right now. We're in the 9.5 year of a 9.5 year recovery. You know, America's economy is good in many measures, such as unemployment average, which is low. The stock market average, if you're in the stock market, you're very happy right now, that average is very high. But for a lot of people across the state, when you get off the interstate and you get into our small and medium-sized communities, places where people love their quality of life, Marions and Zanesvilles and Chillicothe's and Mansfields, you know, they're also struggling. They're struggling with money that's gone to Columbus and not come back. They're struggling with the opioid epidemic. They're struggling with what they continue to see as uneven resources and uneven opportunities with the state government not spreading it out as much as they might across this state. So the social determinants of health, the people who've talked to me about that, on infant mortality and other issues, I'm persuaded that we have to work on those broad problems even as we're working on specific issues in specific areas. But we have an approach as to how we'll spread out opportunity across the state, how we will make sure each community is supported, and it will start in particular by getting local government funding back that people need just to do their basic jobs, just to provide those mental health services, let alone fight the opioid epidemic, which is an additional problem that none of us wishes we had to face, but we do. And we have been failing badly on the opioid crisis in the state of Ohio, and we deserve much better, and we're going to have to make sure that we work in partnership to provide it. But there's much of the state of Ohio that people in the bigger metro areas don't see, and there's much in the bigger metro areas that they don't see even under their nose in terms of poverty and infant mortality and other issues that are affecting our communities. And we need an administration that's going to understand that, but it's only by working together, it's only by teaming up together, sharing resources that we can get these things done effectively.
May I ask a follow-up question? Is that okay? So I just want to follow up on my question around, I would just love to hear specifically what will you do as the governor of the state, specifically for the kids who are the most challenged in our state, African American and rural kids, and some specific interventions around what you would do to make sure that they're thriving and winning like the other peers that sit in the classroom with them.
Yeah. Well, again, let me be even more specific than I've been. We need more attention to home visits in pregnancy, okay? We need more attention to prenatal care. What happens, the most expensive outcomes are premature births and the medical problems they create and the difficulties they create for mothers who are having a hard enough time coping with pregnancy if they don't have proper support systems. We need improved child care support for young parents who are trying to deal with a new child. We need improved efforts for our foster care system in this state. It's got to work better. We need universal pre-K programs, and that will require a number of these things will require an expenditure of resources, and we have to prioritize this in the budget. The good thing is we have a good budget situation in Ohio right now. We just banked a big surplus. We're already projecting a big surplus for the coming year. It's time for us to talk about what investments we need to make. And the legislature will need to work with me, and I will work with them. And you will work with us by advocating and holding their feet to the fire to make sure that we actually put the resources into this that we need. But we also need a better partnership between state and local government. The state needs to work with our cities. It needs to work with our county governments. It needs to treat them fairly. It needs to stop taking their resources and taking authority away from them to Columbus and be Columbus knows all. Columbus doesn't know all. And in lots of places around the state, you'll see that different approaches need to be taken, and we can utilize that local knowledge and expertise. But these are a number of things, very specific things we can do and we need to do. And improving our education system is a whole different topic. But the failing charter schools that have pulled money out of the public schools and haven't been held accountable is another thing that's hurt us, and we will hold them accountable. Good performance is great. Poor performance needs to be remorselessly rooted out.
Thank you for that. And this will probably be the last question, but we know that factors outside of the early education and healthcare systems can have significant impact on our most vulnerable children's ability to learn and lead healthy lives. If elected governor, how will you work to address the social determinants of health and education that impact Ohio kids?
Yeah, so these are the bigger issues that I often talk about around the state because I hear from people about it, day in and day out. The kitchen table issues, the sources of anxiety for people in their economic lives, what kind of future are they going to have, worried about what kind of future their children are going to have. So on the social determinants, first thing we need to do is protect healthcare in Ohio and improve it. I have laid out our approach, which will be to keep costs down for people, to keep prescription cost prices down, to maintain the Medicaid expansion and fight for it, and work to reform and improve it with more preventive and proactive programs within the Medicaid system. We need to improve our insurance exchanges, which have not worked well in Ohio. They haven't gotten the kind of competition and choice and cost control that we should have and some other states have achieved. We need to look at the CHIP program, see where we can expand that and where that's helpful. That's a very cost-effective way of delivering health care. So that's on health care. Protect pre-existing conditions, for gosh sakes. Half of Ohio has a pre-existing condition. Why should people have to worry about they might have to lose their health coverage just because they become a higher risk? On education, there's a number of things we can do to improve K through 12 education. Wraparound services is part of it, taking off a lot of the unfunded mandates so teachers can teach children in the classroom. People can get better outcomes there. I trust our teachers. They need to be allowed to teach. The other services that are provided to children through wraparound services will matter enormously to their performance. And it'll take a lot of stress off of families. That's important. And then, above all, providing opportunity in the state and spreading it across the state so that no community is being left out or left behind. A number of ways we've talked about doing that, stepping into our future with clean energy and the jobs that will bring. Firing up our infrastructure in the state, which we know has been deferred and is overdue, and it's good jobs all across Ohio. Supporting our small and medium-sized businesses who spread all across Ohio and making sure our homegrown businesses can thrive. And getting back local government and community service money from Columbus so that can be spent and be used wisely and circulate in our communities. All of these things will help us all across Ohio. But ultimately, the governor's role is to work on these issues, but also work on the broader issues that create the kind of Ohio where we have a future, where our children will want to stay here, make their lives here, raise their families here, and that's an issue in Ohio right now. Don't kid yourselves. And that we can be a more progressive state, a more tolerant, a more welcoming, a more diverse state, and show those values both to businesses from around the country who don't want to come to an intolerant state, and also to ourselves so that our young people feel proud of this state, want to be here, and we develop a different politics with a different tone that is more inclusive, more partnering, more welcoming, and that's what Ohio, that I know, has always stood for.
Thank you, Mr. Cordray. And there are about 5 to 6 minutes left, and we're going to give you the stage to have some final statements on this topic.
Okay. I kind of thought that's what I was just doing. But if you're going to let me talk even more, I'll talk even more. So, look, I grew up here, and I talk a lot about what has led me to public service. And for me, it was the example my parents set. My mom and dad both worked with children and adults with developmental disabilities their whole careers. Every day they got up and went to work, and it was about someone else. It was about raising somebody else's quality of life. And it's the kind of public service that I think we all deep down really respect and are proud of in this state. It's the kind of work that raises the quality of life in our communities every day. And I see it all over this state. I see teachers, I see police officers and firefighters, I see first responders, I see the mental health specialists, I see the people battling the opioid crisis. Those are the people we need to respect and lift up in this state. I see a politics from Washington, coming from Washington, is very different from that. That's trying to divide us, trying to pit us against one another, that's built on blaming and scapegoating, so as though knocking someone else's down. As I heard somebody put it the other day, that blowing out someone else's candle makes yours shine brighter. It doesn't. We know that in Ohio. It's never solved any problem to divide people and pit them against each other. When we took on the foreclosure crisis 10 years ago, people were losing their homes in this state to predatory lenders. We did that by bringing people together from the state government. I was the state treasurer. Local officials. I worked with Chief Justice Moore of the Ohio Supreme Court to do mediation in the courts. Worked with nonprofits to help loan modifications for people. Worked with the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, a fellow named Steve Dettelbach, to actually prosecute and jail mortgage fraud people who were cheating people out of their homes. It's that kind of effort, bringing people together. We created what we called Homely Save Our Homes task forces. It wasn't in the code. It wasn't anywhere. It was something we created because we saw a problem, we needed to address it. That's the kind of leadership we need in this state. It's the kind of leadership we need on the opioid crisis. It's the kind of leadership we need going forward. And by the way, going forward, we need a check on this legislature. We can't be backwards on all these issues. We can't be backwards on clean energy. We can't be backwards on protecting the environment. We can't be backwards on reducing the gun violence. We can't be backwards on criminal justice reform. We can't be backward on equality issues, on women's rights. These are things we need to move forward on, and we need to check on that legislature. But we also need, and you embody it for me here, is the right kind of advocacy, the right kind of pressure to create bipartisan consensus on important issues that will move Ohio forward. Early childhood learning programs, early childhood intervention, children's health, there's no more critical issues than those. What you're doing here and what you do all along and what you will do with me when I'm governor and with the legislature that I'll be working with is help create the climate. And I'll need you to do it. I'm counting on you to do it. Help create the climate so that when we talk about these important things, and we will make judgments over this next year that will spill out over the next 10 or 20 years, and they'll matter enormously to the future of this state. When we make those judgments, we make them wisely, we make the right investments, we set the right priorities, we make the investments that will keep our state strong and build that next generation. And by the way, whatever we've been doing in Ohio, the upcoming generation right now, the teenagers, the people in their 20s and 30s, they all seem young to me, they are now making a difference. They're standing up and speaking out. They have voices that are voices for progress, voices for treating one another better than what the kind of politics we see from Washington, voices to say no bigotry, no intolerance, no prejudice, no stereotyping, just people working with one another. That's what I see in my children's generation, and that's what we should be doing to bring people along. And if we share leadership with this younger generation this year, we will change this state for the better, and we'll ultimately change this country for the better. And then if we all together will bring along the next generation and give them more advantages and more opportunities and recognize that that isn't true for a lot of children. A lot of families are struggling, a lot of communities are struggling in this state. If we do that, then we'll be the state we can be proud of. That's what I want us to be, that's what I hope to be, and I thank you for the time to spend with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Cordray, for coming out today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.